Hello, this is John Milburn for PROP13001 Property Development. This week is week 5 and we're dealing with the issue of property cycles. The material is based on chapter 5 of your text, and of course I refer to the study guides that I've written to complement rather than replace the material in your textbook. So why are we talking about property cycles? I mean, that's an economic type theory, isn't it? I guess it all comes down to these key concepts. Knowledge is power, and having further knowledge and planning for contingencies deals with issues to do with risk. So again, we're back to primarily functions of risk and dealing with potential downturns in the property market. Risk isn't such an issue when things are going well, but of course we're dealing with issues where there is a downturn. And it's not necessarily all bad news for a property developer if there is a downturn. The reason I say that is that some property developers will in fact prosper. If they can work their way through a downturn, then those that survive will be stronger, better prepared for the next property development, the next boom. Those that are not well prepared are likely to disappear from the industry and minimize the competition for the now larger, stronger players that have been able to work their way through a downturn in the property market. So when we're dealing with property cycles, we are invariably trying to forecast. And of course, that's inherently difficult to do. But what are we trying to forecast and how can we deal with those issues? Well, I guess we can reduce the task of dealing with property cycles to a series of questions. I mean, if we accept that there are property cycles, what is the length of time between the peaks in the property cycles? What is the amplitude of each property cycle? The difference between the highest and the lowest point? And where is the market positioned within a current cycle right now? Clearly, to some degree, we're dealing with informed guesswork. If everyone knew the answers, then we would not be having this seminar tonight. We probably wouldn't have a course on property development. Everyone would be able to profit easily if we knew exactly about the property cycles, peaks and troughs. But we can obtain some information that will put us in a better position to guard against those likely drops in the value of property generally. So it may be that we look at company reports, we consider forecasts, we obtain the best material that we can, probably from a series of sources, and in addition to that, we develop as property developers a strategy for the guarding against a downturn in the property cycle, and quite often that means looking at pre-sales off the planned sales for the proposed development under consideration. So in essence, there is a wide range of factors that might have a bearing on property cycles, and there are many things that property developers can do to at least have some idea of the effect of property cycles on their development. In a way, what we're also considering are issues to do with supply and demand. In other words, a property cycle may coincide with a glut of supply on the marketplace, leading to depressed prices because the demand is insufficient to meet the supply. The reverse may well apply. If there's short supply and high demand, then one might expect that the price for the sale of, or the purchase rather of product or leasing of product will increase. So property cycles are linked to supply and demand as well. And prudent property developers will try to determine the level of demand and time it so that their product is ready for sale or lease at the time when there is maximum demand and minimum supply. So we're really thinking about the quantity of real estate lots in their proposed development against other lots that are coming on the market or are on the market already. And clearly then, from what I've said, that there are times where there's an oversupply, there are times that there's an undersupply, and there's times where there's an equilibrium. But the third of those options in reality rarely occurs. So as the authors say, whilst it's familiar for people to say that to be successful in property, it's all about position, position, or position, or location, location, location. In reality, it may well be more a case of timing, 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 as Reed and Sims point out at 5.5 in their text. So what's one strategy that we can do to buffer against unexpected falls? We can look at pre-sales or pre-leases, that is the sale of proposed lots or the leasing of proposed lots at an early stage. We often refer to these pre-sales as off-the-plan contracts. In Queensland, if you're looking at an off-the-plan contract, you need to consider both the Land Sales Act for what we call flat land subdivisions, that is a subdivision of land. It doesn't have to be literally flat, but something which is not developed as part of a community title scheme or strata, if you like. There's no body corporate. So the Land Sales Act applies for basically land sales in a subdivision. The Body Corporate and Community Management Act deals primarily with community titles, but both will be relevant. So you need to consider both. You need to, as a property developer, in selling land off the plan, in non-community title schemes, flat land subdivisions, identify the proposed lot, the area of the lot, the orientation of the lot, then provide a disclosure statement and a disclosure plan to the buyer, and ensure that the strict rules of how these things are delivered and presented to the buyer are complied with. And remember, of course, that there are strict rules that relate to the payment of deposit. You can't just, as a property developer, say, well, I will build into my cash flow the fact that people will pay me these deposits and I'll use that for my own working capital to supplement what I need to borrow. You can't do that. There are strict rules. Essentially, the money has to be protected. It has to be held by a real estate agent or a solicitor in a legal practice or the public trustee. Essentially, what it means is that if the buyer terminates validly in any circumstance where they're entitled to do so, the money, the deposit, should be immediately available for refund. So these are rules that are set out in the Land Sales Act, and I have provided a link in the material to the Land Sales Act. I'll just attempt to share the screen if I can, so that you can have a look at the Land Sales Act. Bear with me a moment. Not that it's any great secret. I like to go to Legislation Queensland in order to do that. So now you should see the Land Sales Act, the sections on the left, all hyperlinks. And when you're looking at the legislation, be aware that you can look at the subordinate legislation, you can look at the bills. That's useful when you're looking for the explanatory memorandum or explanatory note, as the case might be, about the introduction of that legislation. Now, while I'm sharing the screen, also in Queensland legislation, you'll find the Body Corporate and Community Management Act. I have included links in the study guide to these pieces of legislation. And later, we'll be talking about information that you can obtain about sales and valuations. There's the link to Queensland Government, Property Sales and Valuation Products and Services, with a fee list, which is reproduced in your study guide. And finally, there's material through RP Data, Core Logic, which provides information about sales. And you can see there that there's a special area for builders and developers. Right, I'll attempt to stop the share now and return to the basic commentary. So have a look at the Land Sales Act. There's detail in the study guides. That's probably all you need, but you can go beyond that, and I would encourage you to go beyond that and look at the legislation itself. Also look at the Body Corporate and Community Management Act, which provides for the disclosure obligations in circumstances where the property developer is looking to sell a proposed community title scheme lot. One thing that you might consider as a property developer is how you go about engaging body corporate managers or service contractors. You need to disclose those contracts to buyers, and also how you go about setting budgets. So I expect that you would need to engage the services of a body corporate advisor to assist in setting up the body corporate and, importantly, setting up the budgets. Just one thing that I have noticed developers tend to do is keep the amounts which are payable to the body corporate very low at the outset, as low as they can. Two reasons for that. It makes the investment look more attractive in that the amount of money that has to be paid on a regular basis to own that unit is less. And also, it provides an opportunity for the developer to pay less if they're, as it were, stuck with some part of the development after it's released to the public, so they're not paying as much. But invariably, there will be a catch-up if, for example, the sinking fund is under subscribed in the early years. Those that come in to buy a unit at a later time may find that they suffer, as it were, a penalty in extra payments to the sinking fund to cater for expenses that might well have been contributed to at the outset by initial buyers or the developer. But anyway, if you're a property developer, I guess what you're really looking to do is make the product that you have as attractive as possible, but please ensure that you abide by your disclosure obligations under the Act. There are exceptions to the disclosure obligations for flatland subdivisions under the Land Sales Act. That is, if there are 5 lots or less in the subdivision, those rules don't apply, and those exemptions don't apply in a strata title situation. Another strategy that you could adopt as a property developer is to pre-lease lots which are proposed. So pre-leasing provides you with an opportunity to enter into an agreement to lease with typically a commercial client and the agreement is that subject to the developer providing the ultimate product, the parties will then enter into the lease, and typically the lease is annexed as a schedule to the agreement to lease. All of these things help to encourage the property developer to proceed. They know that there's some demand for their sale or lease, as the case may be. It will help the property developer in terms of obtaining funding, provide comfort to the financier, and also it will provide a buffer against dramatic drops in the property market. So there are a lot of good reasons why a property developer would consider at least attempting some pre-sale or pre-leasing of property off the plan. So that's one strategy that a property developer might use to deal with the issue of risk and property cycles. Of course, there's much more to it. I've alluded to the fact that you can obtain as a property developer information about existing sales or past sales. You can find that through the Office of the Valuer General, and you can look at the Queensland Valuation and Sales Search Register, which is in the study guide, for information and guidance that way. Or CoreLogic RP Data, which is through the REIQ. So a good property developer will take all of this information, will consider these strategies, but overlay all of that effectively over the top of visionary skills. When I mean visionary skills, to some degree you need to be intuitive and anticipate what the property cycles might be, and they can vary for different areas. So for example, in a city context, it may be that there is an opportunity to regenerate urban areas by including some inner city residential conversions and things of that nature. In the notes, I've talked about the types of property settlements, property cycles, and you'll see that in your text as well. So look at figure 5.2, and that demonstrates the nature of multiple cycles in a single market. Also have a look at figure 5.3, and that deals with property markets within a financial and economic framework. And you'll note that the impact of high interest rates in the business cycle has a negative impact on property developers. It limits their capacity to borrow funds for property development. So what's another strategy that property developers can do in the context of property cycles? Well, I guess in simple terms, always consider the worst case scenario. Consider the possibility of slow sales at discounted price. What are you going to do to guard against that? Do you have multiple sets of cash flow projections to cater for multiple circumstances? Is there something else that you can consider doing to create an equilibrium if that equilibrium doesn't exist at the present time. So in conclusion, we can say that property cycles is important for property developers. Property developers need to consider their knowledge bank. They need to obtain up-to-date information about property sales, which will help them to anticipate property cycles. They need to consider the macroeconomic view, and they need to develop strategies. And word of warning, if things do go badly, even though your strategy might be to sell off the plan as much as you can, even that strategy can come undone at times, because the same purchasers who have purchased property off the plan may then seek to offload their product at the same time that you as the property developer are looking to sell or offload your product which wasn't sold to the off-the-plan buyers. So the same buyers that were assisting you by buying off the plan may actually come back to hurt you by putting their property back on the market, which has the effect of flooding the market with these resales. It seems in a way that property developers can't win. We know that's not true, but the moral is be as well prepared as you possibly can. Thank you for your attendance.